Welcome home. We are WNST, AM 1570, Towson, Baltimore, and Baltimore Positive. You can find us out on the internet, hoping that you are setting a spot on your radio dial for us so you can tune in on our Monday mornings. Hopefully, it won't be an 0-3 Monday morning next Monday. It's been a long week, and it's early in the week. The Orioles have made it even longer over the weekend. If you were avoiding them at lunchtime on Sunday, they lost again. Headed home now. Luke will be really doing double duty. I've written at length about my Declaration of Independence. If you have read my letter to Eric DaCosta, you would understand my anger and frustration that on a week like this, we only have one person that can cover both teams. But Luke will be attempting to do that this week. The Orioles will be playing very important games. 3 games back, dude. Hey, you want to stop talking about the 0-2 Ravens and John Harbaugh and Justin Tucker's leg and Lamar's game and how crappy the offensive line is? Let's talk about the Orioles, Luke Jones.
Yeah, let's talk about them in what was a very frustrating weekend in Detroit. A weekend where they received good starting pitching. Eflin was good on Friday night. Burns was maybe the best he's been all year, or maybe since opening day, let's say, in terms of ton of swing and miss. They do win that game, although it got a little hairy in the 9th inning, more than you would have liked, with Sir Anthony Dominguez on the mound with a 4-run lead. And lo and behold, Cade Povich gave them a very competitive outing on Sunday afternoon and an opportunity to take a series and beat a team. I'm going to give you one that I saw in the midst of the Ravens game, and as the Orioles were on their way to losing on Sunday. I saw this. I can't take credit for it, but the Orioles have not won a series against a team that currently holds a winning record since beating Seattle 4th of July week. That was the last time they took a series against a team that's currently above 500. Now, they've got some splits. They haven't won very many series over the last 2 months in general, but it just speaks to how long this has gone on. And look, I mean, running out of time here, running out of games here to make up the deficit against the Yankees. I mean, they obviously have the trip to the Bronx next week, but you're still not hitting the ball. What's the shame of this is I looked up their stats early Monday morning in the month of September, 10th in the majors in ERA, 5th in starter ERA. So no Kyle Bradish, no Grayson Rodriguez, no John Means, no Tyler Wells. Their rotation's been really good over
That's
the
the
last.
thing we were the most worried about at every moment. From the minute Bradish got injured, it's like, who will the big 3 be in October? How do we get there? We went from 6 to 3 in like 2 weeks back in June, right? And then they add Eflin, and he was a little bit of a question mark, but it's been fantastic. And Burns hasn't been so fantastic. And it's a baseball season, dude. It's a slog, man. It really is. And this is the point where you see how much gas you have. The best teams play the best right now, and that doesn't appear to be this baseball team right now.
No, and I mean, obviously, there's 2 weeks in the regular season, right? A couple weeks from now, we're going to be talking about the postseason. I mean, it's almost upon us.
It's fall training as opposed to spring training.
They're right. They're going to be in the postseason. They're not going to squander a wild card spot, but are they going to hold on to the top one, or is it going to be a case where you drop below Kansas City and suddenly you're on the road for the wild card round? I mean, that's, they're only a couple games up on the Royals. Forget about, put aside the Yankee talk and the division talk for a moment. They want to hold on to that top wild card spot at least, because you're playing a best of 3. Sure as heck would like to be at home at the very least. But, I just mentioned the starter ERA. Obviously, the bullpen still having its concerns. Jacob Webb came back on Sunday. Good to see, although he gave up a run. Danny Coulombe, sometime this week maybe. We see him back. So, other reinforcements on the way. How quickly? I mean, we're down to the last couple of weeks. I mean, you can only keep saying later in September so long until, it's here. Are you ready to go or not? But the big issue and the biggest reason why they're 6-7 in the month of September, and the biggest reason why they had the August that they did in September, Nestor, Orioles, 25th in runs scored, 20th in slugging, 23rd in batting average. We know about runners in scoring position and their issues there. I mean, it just isn't a very good offense right now, period. And I'll continue to remind everyone, for the proper context, proper perspective, offense around baseball is not very good. So sometimes when you see the stats and you say, oh, the Orioles are the absolute worst. No, it could get a lot worse, believe it or not. But for a team that wants to be a contender, for a team that is trying to prime itself for an October run, for a team that's trying to get healthy. And I mean, instead, we're talking about, Jackson Holiday losing at bats to Livan Soto, who had a really good game on Saturday. I mean, that's where we are at this point. Adley Rutschman, he looks good for 3 or 4 games, and you're saying, okay, he's starting to look like Adley Rutschman. And hey, he hit a home run on Sunday, great, but he's got to do it. Like, he's got to look like Adley Rutschman again, not look like him for 3 games and then taking a bunch of offers again. So right now, this offense, if it's not Gunnar Henderson and Cedric Mullins at the top of the order, I mean, that's not to say no one else is doing anything at all. And, Santander's, 40 home runs. I get all that, but this is just not a very deep lineup right now at all. And I mean, uh, you're waiting on Jordan Westberg. You're waiting on Ramon Arias. Certainly, if those guys can get back and look like themselves, that will help. But there are just too many guys scuffling and not getting the job done at the plate. And, it's put an unnecessary burden on their pitching staff that, especially their rotation that, I mean, they got 3 starts that were worthy of wins over the course of the weekend. So to lose 2 out of 3, it's really demoralizing as you're trying to stay in this division race with the Yankees and hold on to that top wild card. So really disappointing weekend in that regard. But it's what we've been talking about for, the overall struggles and mediocrity for 2.5 months now, if not a little longer than that. And the offense really, really struggling since, the beginning of August. I mean, it's been a long time now where this team has played really mediocre baseball, and it's still the first 2.5 months propping them up, right? I mean, if it weren't for that, if those first 2.5 months didn't count, we wouldn't even be talking about the playoffs right now. But, can they find a way to get themselves going offensively in concert with their starting pitching doing what it's done, waiting for Grayson Rodriguez to come back, waiting for Danny Coulomb to come back, hoping Jacob Webb looks like himself, first outing notwithstanding. It's a lot of ifs, though. I mean, at some point in time, we're down to the last 2 weeks, and so many ifs, and you just have to wonder, realistically speaking, how many of those things are going to come to fruition.
Luke Jones is our guest. He is Baltimore Luke. He'll be covering all things Orioles and Ravens this week. And, if you don't like talking about the offensive line, we can move over and talk about the offense of the Orioles, or the offensive offense. I'm not shocked that the Ravens offensive line kind of stinks. I mean, I'm a little shocked that DeCosta and Harbaugh in the offseason, we talked about Joe Delisandris. I'm not shocked by that. That the fact that they're 0-2, I'm shocked by that. I am shocked that the offense just shut off for this team. I think we saw this wasn't going to be a team that walked a whole lot, right? I mean, but a team that runs the bases pretty well. I'm shocked by how bad the defense has been over the body of work, especially over the last 90 or 120 days. Not necessarily maybe April or May, but I'm shocked by the bats. I'm shocked by the defense, but way more so by we're talking about mid-20s level production as an offense against the grain at a time when for 2 years there was a different star every night. They lived the Oriole Magic theme. Everybody was going to hit the ball. But there was a mojo about it. There was an energy about it that somehow lost with the injuries. And when you watch it now, you can put the sound down and just watch the body language of Brandon Hyde. Watch the body language. I mean, there aren't walk-off moments, and there's not sprinklers. When you don't hit the ball, there's no sprinklers. When you don't hit home runs, we don't all get to go and drink and squirt each other and like all of that. This homestand would go a long way to turning things around by hitting the ball at home a little bit. And I know they're not coming home to a King's welcome. This isn't like Major League where the ballpark gets filled at the end. I saw that movie last year. I'll be writing to Katie Griggs. You think I was tough on Eric DeCosta last week? Wait till Greg Bader gets his letter. Wait till Katie Griggs gets her letter. Wait till David Rubin. But from a fan standpoint and the mojo this week with the football team and the team being home, and there'll be 20,000 people, whatever there is this week. They're unloading their closet and getting rid of their stuff, their swag this week, the whole deal. And then they got to go to New York next week. And I don't know if they'll be 4 games back and uncatchable, or 2 games back and maybe, or a game back and maybe catch them. It would really feel good to have a thing. I mean, this next 2 weeks, they need a thing. They need to win some games. They need to win some games with big bats. They need to excite the people that are going to the ballpark this week. And they need to create some level of energy to go to New York next week, not 5 back. You know what I mean? Not really falling down the mountain further than they have fallen. And that's really going to involve hitting the ball and hitting the ball at home in their own ballpark, fielding the ball cleanly, starting to round out. And I said fall training as a little bit of probably a training day reference there in some way to our old morning show host here. But the fall training of you and I going down to Sarasota in March and saying, are they going to be ready to play on opening day? Opening day is October 2nd now, right? Or whatever that game's going to be 2 weeks from tomorrow, Tuesday, whenever it's going to be. They need to be in good form then. And they need to create some mojo that they don't have right now. Because I think it's too much to ask them to stumble to the finish line, to stumble into this wild card space, to play baseball 2 weeks from Tuesday and have anybody expect anything different if they're going to be, 5-8 over the next 2 weeks or however many games they have left. If they're going to be 4-7 stumbling to the finish line, all you can hope for is they start hitting the ball better, start showing some vital signs of a team that can give us some hope 2 weeks from now, because the pitching's done that. The starting pitching's given me some hope.
Yeah, I think that's fair. One thing that I'll slightly disagree with, though, I mean, at some point in time, I'm not as shocked by the offense struggling because, I mean, look at the bottom third of their lineup on a nightly basis. I mean, Emmanuel Rivera, Livan Soto, Jackson Holiday, who, look, and we talked about this a good bit last week. His last month has been not as bad as his first 10 games in the majors back in April, but
still below the bar.
It's been closer to that than the guy that we saw than the 20-year-old that gave them a jolt in early August when he got recalled. So, I mean, you look at it when you have 3 or 4 guys in your lineup, and look, Emmanuel Rivera and Livan Soto have actually had their moments relative to what your expectations would be for guys who weren't even on the roster a couple months ago. But I mean, what is that? I mean, Ryan O'Hearn has become basically an everyday player. He's not an everyday player, right? I mean, he's played not that he's gotten a lot of starts against left-handed pitching because they haven't faced a lot of left-handed starters here over the last few weeks, but he's playing more than he would have. Certainly playing first base more than he would have, and he's a downgrade defensively over Mountcastle at first base. So there's a defensive aspect to this. And we've talked at length, whether we're talking about Holiday or Colton Cowser being as up and down as Colton Cowser is, even though overall he still has a good profile and still could very well win Rookie of the Year. But we know that he's either really hot or it's really bad. Like there hasn't been a whole lot of in between for him. We've talked about Adley Rutschman being a replacement level hitter for the better part of 2.5 months now, save for, these 3 or 4 game periods where you start to have some hope, and then he goes 0 for his next 9, right? I mean, and that's one of your 2 best players. That's one of your foundation pieces right there, right? I mean, Jackson Holiday, we think will be a foundation piece, but he hasn't done it at the major league level yet. So that's why I said to you last week when we had this conversation, if Jackson Holiday was doing what he's been doing as your number 9 hitter, but you had your other 8 guys healthy and kind of humming offensively the way that you would expect, you could carry that and you'd be okay most likely, right? And he probably wouldn't feel as much pressure as he feels right now in the way that all these guys are feeling pressure because of their woes with runners in scoring position or the fact that, they, on any given night, it feels like they only have 2 or 3 guys hitting. Really doing any threat of damage. So it's just a lot. So from that standpoint, and don't get me wrong, I'm not disagreeing with your overall point, but as more time goes on and they've had more attrition with the position players, even though it hasn't been as magnified as the starting pitching concerns going all the way back to spring training with Bradish and Means at that point, it still has added up, right? Because it's not just Jordan Westberg, but it's also Ryan Mountcastle. And it's also Ramon Arias. And yeah, I'll throw Jorge Mateo in there, even though Jorge Mateo wasn't going to be an everyday second baseman. But the way Jackson Holiday has struggled, he might be right now, right? So all of that adds up, not just because you missed their production, but what's the trickle-down effect there? When you're talking about missing Ryan Mountcastle, okay, you still have Ryan O'Hearn, but now he's probably seeing a few more matchups that you'd like to keep him away from otherwise. and he's playing more first base than you'd like him to play otherwise. Jackson Holiday was playing just about every day. You probably would have liked to be in a position where you could sit him against more left-handers and maybe not play him 7 days a week. Maybe he'd play 4 or 5, and that'd be in the way that you protect him. It's what the Orioles have done with Cedric Mullins. Cedric Mullins' turnaround in June, I give him a credit. I give him major credit for the way he's performed since June. But a big part of that is they've kept him away from left-handed pitching as much as they've been able to, because he's become more of a platoon player than he was 3 years ago. So you always have players that you're trying to optimize their use. And when you're missing as many players, whether you're talking pitching, and what it's done to their bullpen, or, what it's done to their starting rotation at times, or missing some position players, even if they're only missing one all-star caliber guy in Jordan Westburg. It was an all-star, not all-star caliber. It still adds up in terms of having to lean on some other guys in matchups you don't like, or maybe liking to give them a few more off days, pick your spots a little more. And it's undeniable that isn't a factor here that's really built up on them, and I think is a big reason why they've struggled. So as more time goes on, and we see these guys where you feel like you need a scorecard, it's like, wait, when did that guy join the roster? Nick Maton, Emmanuel Rivera, Livan Soto. Who are these guys? Well, when they're playing and they're playing in a pennant race, it speaks a lot to where you are. Not to mention some of those guys have performed better than some of your regulars that are scuffling. So just a lot of frustration. And I think you see it on a nightly basis with Brandon Hyde and how he talks. I think you're seeing it with the players. Not that anyone is being unprofessional or anyone's jaking it or anyone's giving up. I just think they're really, really frustrated. And to your point, the light is, this isn't something that's way out in the distance now. This is 2 weeks from now. We're going to be talking about a playoff matchup. And it's going to be, whether it's wild card or whether it's somehow winning the division and enjoying 4 or 5 days off to set your rotation and whatnot. But at some point in time, it's getting really late, really, early here, and they're still waiting for some of these guys to come back from injury. And in the meantime, they're still not doing what they need to do offensively. They're not doing what they need to do defensively. And the bullpen is still, you're still looking to see, okay, can you find a couple more guys in addition to Dominguez? And I didn't even mention it. My apologies on this. We found out Saturday night, Yennier Cano dealing with some soreness here recently. So what's going on there? You want to talk about another final straw that breaks the camel's back as it pertains to the bullpen, Yennier Cano. And maybe that explains why we talked about it last week in Boston, why he only threw 2 pitches and didn't come out for the 9th inning. So just when you're getting some guys back, the health questions persist. So, it's a lot. It's a lot to keep laying out the if this, if that, when this, when that. At some point in time, you're going to run out of time here if you just don't start playing better, period, regardless of who you're hoping comes back here in the next 2 weeks.
Luke Jones can be found at Baltimore Luke. He can be found at Camden Yards. He can be found at Owings Mills. He can be found somewhere on the road between there and here. And Royal Farms powering him up, getting him where he needs to go. We're going to be at Fadley's on Friday doing the Maryland Crab Cake Tour presented by the Maryland Lottery. We'll have Raven scratch-offs to give away. Also, our friends at Jiffy Lube powering us up and getting us out onto the road, making it all happen. We're doing this crazy oyster tour. We're eating all these oysters. We'll be putting that out at Baltimore Positive this week as well for the Oyster Recovery Partnership. Next week, we have the B&O Railroad Museum event on the 26th. You can buy tickets for that. Come down if you love oysters, you want to slurp, you want to learn, you want to be supportive. A lot of oyster farmers going to be doing the show next week as well. But Friday, we're at Fadley's with John Sarbanes. And then the following Friday, the 27th, we're going to be at Costas. I am wearing my Costas gear, getting back down to Dundalk. And I'll be slurping the Oysters Rockefeller there. I think our friends from JO are going to be joining us. JO Seafood going to be joining us on Friday down at Damie's place inside Lexington Market. Come on down before the Orioles take on the Detroit Tigers. Scoreboard watching and the Yankees and how they match up against the Indians and how they match up against the do you have any thoughts on even scoreboard watching all of this as we're saying who's rounding in and who's rounding out? Where would a matchup be and how could bats turn on in a game one? Because let's be honest, they don't have to hit the ball this week. They have to hit the ball 2 weeks from now. And they have to pitch 2 weeks from now. And that's why I go into all of this is saying, I feel like this is fall training. I don't need them to win every day. I need them to start feeling good about themselves.
Yeah, I think that's fair. I mean, and look, I mean, obviously, I was quite preoccupied with the Ravens on Sunday. I saw the beginning of the Orioles game as I was watching on my laptop, and then they kicked off and they didn't hit the ball, so that's why they lost. A Rutschman home run notwithstanding. But you look at the landscape of the AL, and I've talked about this a lot. I mean, give the Yankees credit; they're playing better of late. They've won 7 of 10. I think the team that right now, if the postseason started today, the Orioles would be playing the Royals. And you look at what the Royals have done, and they've had their periods of time where it looks like they're ready to take off, and then they stub their toe for the next week and a half. But I mean, they're going to be a playoff team. I think their ESPN has them at 97% at this point. So barring a collapse, they're going to be in. They've won 7 of 10. Bobby Witt has been everything that Gunnar Henderson was in the first half, right? And not to say that Gunnar hasn't played well since his, very underwhelming month of August. But you've got a transcendent player there. They've, they've they played really well. I mean, they're that team. They're kind of where the Orioles were a year ago, where you'd say, "Wow, they're this good this soon." I mean, the Royals, go look at what their record was last year. They're a 100+ win loss or 100+ loss team. So this has been really interesting for them. I'm not necessarily picking them to win the World Series or anything crazy like that, but they kind of feel like they're the team how we viewed the Orioles a year ago, where you'd say they don't really realize they're not supposed to be this good this soon. So, and they've got some pitching that certainly plays. So, we've continued to talk about Houston for a while now. I mean, the Astros, finished the weekend on a 4-game winning streak. They far and away have the biggest, the most impressive pedigree of any of these AL teams. But I don't know, Nestor. For me, from a scoreboard watching standpoint, obviously the Yankees are, have been at the forefront, and obviously they've opened up a 3-game lead. But it's been much closer than that, even over the last 2 months, where neither of those teams played very well. Right? It's one of the reasons why it stayed so close is both the Yankees and the Orioles have been mediocre since June overall. But until I start seeing the Orioles hit the ball and get some of these guys back and start to feel like they're rounding into form. To your point, it doesn't mean they got to win 8 in a row here, but how about winning some series? I mean, we talked about this September schedule being on the softer side until leading up to that Yankee series next week. And I mean, they've got, they've got a losing record. They're 6-7 in September. So it's go time. At some point in time, like I can't just watch what everyone else is doing. At some point, it's like, what are you doing? What are the Orioles doing themselves to get themselves ready to make sure that they, at the very least, hold on to that top wild card spot? You don't want to go on the road in a 3-game wild card format where you lose 2 games in 24 hours and you're done. I mean, that's how quickly it happens. That's why I've said all along that all things being equal, you'd rather have the first round bye, but because you just want to avoid the unpredictability of a best of 3. But I mean, it's tough for me to kind of dwell on potential matchups and who's playing well and who's not, because I mean, the Orioles have lost series here to teams that you feel like they really don't have a whole lot of business losing series to, but they're mediocre. They've been a 500 team since June. They've been sub 500, depending on where you want to go back and because they were 24 over 500 at a few different points. And look where they are now. They're 18 over, so it's a 6-game drop off there, right? So it's tough. I'm trying to look at that. And like I said, there's no one in the AL where I say, oh my gosh, no one's touching them. That team is so dominant. That team is just going to
Or that
cruise
you
to the World
can't go
Series.
out and Corbin Burns gives you 6 2/3 and you
Sure.
win game 1 4-2 because Gunnar hits a 3-run home run and you run the bases well and you turn a double play and you
Yeah.
Mullins lays out and steals a double in the outfield. Like, I've seen this act. You know what I mean? I haven't
Yeah.
seen it lately. And to your point, these guys in the lineup, I mean, I got guys with beards hitting home runs in Fenway Park. And my wife's like, who's that guy? Like, who are
Yeah.
these people? Who's Austin Slater? Who are these people? But I know who Kobe Mayo is, and I know who Jackson Holiday is, and they told me they were going to be good. And then they come up and they hit, like John Blutarski, 0.0. The hope of all of that still remains, as we have this really wise guy around here named Luke Jones, who said before the trading deadline, they win or lose games in October, it's going to be about Gunnar Henderson and Adley Rutschman and their star players being star players. And I don't disagree with any of that. And as long as they're not where Westberg was 6 weeks ago injured, and they're available to play 2 weeks from now and healthy, and I'm with you. Timing, shadows, time off, pitchers not being, ready to go 40, 50 pitches in Grayson Rodriguez's case. I don't know where that's going to be, but
Yeah.
whatever all of that is, to assemble that and win game one, yeah, you got to beat the Kansas City Royals in one game. Not tonight, 2 weeks from tonight. Here, there, wherever we're going to play it, like, got to win that game. Got to win. That's when the lights come on, and they're certainly capable of winning that game. Not just 4-2. They're capable of winning that game 12-2. I mean, they're capable of winning any game 12-2, and that's the part that I'm not gonna be the guy writing the Orioles can't win the World Series on 2 weeks from Monday, unless Gunnar Henderson and Adley Rutschman can't play and Burns has bursitis, and like, if they get these guys, they get these horses, no matter how bad they looked against Detroit last week, no matter how bad they look this week. We had Joe Flacco planking and Cam Cameron getting fired, and they win the Super Bowl. Like, I'm not down on the Orioles because I'm up on their personnel. I've seen them all do this. I've seen Cowser, Mount, any of these guys that could catch fire that we don't talk about much. I've seen it, and I can believe it can happen in game one. And I know it can't happen in game one this week. It can only sort of start to get a little better. And I just want to see some signs of life. I'm not even asking them to win every night. I'm not asking them to do what you asked them to do last year, blow more teams out. I just want to see fundamental good baseball. I want to see good pitching. I want to see them hitting cutoff man. I want to see defense being defense. I want to see routine plays being made. And I want to see them taking better pitches and having better at bats and against these bad teams, against San Francisco and Detroit, against these teams that are just okay. And then the Yankees thing next week, I don't want to see him go up there and get in a brawl and go headhunting. But I will say this. Somebody from them throws it at the head of Gunnar Henderson, shit's going to go down. You know what I mean? Like, I don't think these teams like each other, and I think the Orioles are going to like a whole lot less going up there being back 4 games, because that might be the case by the time they get there. I don't know. That depends about this week, but we are getting real nitty-gritty. Feels like you and I talk so much football, 0-2, 0-2, Lamar, offensive line. Wait, Cleveland we've talked about, or enters Ben. We'll be talking about the other Cleveland 2 weeks from now. I still hold out hope that this can get exciting for a week or two, if not win the World Series, that they can win a series or a game, which would put them ahead of last year.
Yeah, I mean, no question. And again, I agree with you. No one should be writing them off. If you're asking me to predict, if you'd be asking me to wager, I'm not so sure I'd be putting a whole lot on it at this point in time, because it's just gone on so long. I think for me, and this is where I'm starting, and not that anyone's even been dishonest about it, because I think there's always unknown when you're trying to project out these injuries and trying to project when guys are going to come back. It's getting really late, right? I mean, we're already at mid-September. And it's like, Jordan Westbrook's starting to swing and all up. Like, I'm not saying it's that he won't be back, but you're starting to look at some of these guys like Grayson Rodriguez. He's on, it seems like, live batting practice and like, so he's getting close, but I was kind of hoping he'd already be past that and maybe he'd be being on a rehab assignment at this point, right? So you're running out of days on the calendar. I mean, you mentioned Mountcastle. It doesn't sound like Mountcastle's playing again this year. I mean, that's the latest update did not sound. No, they didn't rule him out, but he was in Sarasota and the wrist isn't making a lot of progress and all that. So
curse that, maybe, right? I mean,
now. And I'm glad you brought him up, because there's a case. If we're talking about offensive upside, we've talked about Jackson Holliday and Kobe Mayo because they've been on the roster, right? Heston Kjerstad, if you recall, before he got beamed in that Yankee series, in the second week of July, he had really been swinging the bat well. I mean, remember, he had the grand slam. He had some good moments, and gets hit in the head, comes off the concussion list, clearly wasn't right. Symptoms resurfaced. He's back on the concussion list. But they activated him on Sunday. We'll see. He has the kind of ability or upside that he could catch fire. I mean, they hit him cleanup. That shows you what they think about his potential, and it also speaks to the overall state of the lineup. But they might need something like that to happen, right? It might need to be Heston Kjerstad suddenly looks like Babe Ruth for the next month, right? I mean, look at his name's escaping me. The Rangers outfielder last October, the kid who just got called up at the end of the year, and look what he did. I'm sorry, this is going off 3 hours of sleep off a Ravens post game night, but we've seen it. We've seen young guys suddenly it clicks for them for 3 or 4 weeks, even in October. I mean, I can remember, what was he, 18 or 19 years old, Andrew Jones for the Braves in 96. It looked like he was going to be MVP of that series, and they were going to be on their way to winning that. And then the Yankees, of course, had other ideas as that series went on. But look at what Andrew Jones did as a kid in October. So you never dismiss it. At the same time, you can't really predict that either. And that's where you're kind of looking at this, where you say the Orioles have looked like this for this long now. You do wonder if they are going to come out of it, or it might just, you kind of chalk it up to a long year. Just, and I'll leave you with this point. I was talking to a couple other people in the press box before the Ravens game on Sunday. A couple people who don't cover the Orioles per se, but pay close attention. And I think we need to remember, and I don't say this to make an excuse because, I mean, you're going to have to look at everything that happened, whenever this is over, if they don't win the World Series, right? Or they don't get to the World Series. But everything went so well last year and things just clicked so quickly. And think about it. They went from 110 losses in 2001 to what, 83 and 79, I think it was in 2002 or 2022, 21 to 22. And then, of course, they won 101 games last year. I mean, you look at that kind of not just improvement, dramatic improvement over those 3 years. They were never going to, the expectation wasn't that they were going to win 116 games this year. But one thing we need to remember with young players, and this is where the Orioles maybe in hindsight, or maybe some people even said, I can recall some people even saying this in the offseason. It feels like maybe they kind of got caught in between here in terms of being full-blown contender, but also having some guys that you're going to be counting on that have never done this at the major league level, like Jackson Holliday or like Kobe Mayo or Heston Kjerstad, who, injuries have played a part there for him, certainly the last couple of years. But you kind of go down the list and it just feels like, maybe the Orioles ended up being a little too much in between, full-blown, established, bona fide, no questions asked World Series contender, and also having these young guys that are still kind of learning. And
Well, dude, Rutschman has stunk, and that's something we could not have counted on, right?
Sure.
Like, Rutschman has stunk.
He's on the older side, right? I mean, he's not 21. He's older. He's more established compared to Jackson Holliday at 20 or 22-year-old Kobe Mayo or even Colton Cowser for that matter. But I use this example with you. I vividly recall this even in the offseason. That's one reason why I picked the Orioles, I think, to win 94 games this year. Now, that's looking like that's too optimistic based on what we're even seeing and what their pace is right now. But the reason why I saw that, one, things went so well last year. Two, based on their run differential, true talent level might not have been a 101 win team. It might have been a few games less than that. But part of this was also looking at recent history. So many times with young players and young teams, we always think about it being linear, right? You improve from this year to the next, and then you get even better the year after that, and then you get better the year after that, and you win the World Series. It's a nice, warm, cozy, fuzzy progression, right? But look no further than where Sig Mejdal and Houston were, and Mike Elias were in Houston a decade ago. Go look at that Astros team in 15. They were a wild card team. They were, look like, oh my gosh, this team they're finally a juggernaut. And then what happened in 16? They had some injuries. They didn't make the playoffs even. And then they won the World Series the following year. Now, granted, trash cans and all that, putting that part of it aside for just a moment. But the point is, this isn't always linear. And as much as you have young players who suddenly look the part and do what the Orioles did last year and win 101 games, you also can have hiccups. And certainly the health has been a massive part of that this year. But they've also had some guys from a development standpoint. I mean, No one clear. It's very obvious. Mike Elias and Sig Mejdal and Brandon Hyde did not anticipate Jackson Holliday struggling the way he is. But he's 20, and that doesn't mean he's not going to be a multi-time All-Star or be a Hall of Famer 20 years from now. But he struggled at age 20. He struggled way more than Manny Machado did at age 20 when he was called up 12 years ago and helped the Orioles in a playoff push at that point. Manny, from the time he arrived in the major leagues, was a Gold Glove defender at third base, even though that was a new position for him. Jackson Holliday, new position, second base, hasn't gone as well. Transition from short to second is more challenging than short to third, based on talking to baseball experts and players and all of that. But point still stands. Manny Machado, Gold Glove defender from the day he arrived in the major leagues. And he was a league average offensive player as a rookie, as a 20-year-old. He hit seventh or eighth or ninth for the Orioles that year. He wasn't what Manny Machado would become a couple years after that, but that he was a prodigy. And that doesn't mean that Jackson Holliday won't be third in the MVP voting even next year. Who knows? I don't know, but he's not that right now. He's not anything close to that right now. So as much as you have plans for development and as much as things went so well last year until Felix Bautista's injury in late August, things have not gone well this year in that regard, in terms of health, in terms of counting on some younger players to really step forward. Westberg was a great success story. Colton Cowser, a good success story. But Jackson Holliday has kind of been benched for Livan Soto over the weekend, right? I mean, that's where he is right now. He's really scuffling. Kobe Mayo has really scuffled. So it doesn't always go perfectly, and sometimes this is cliche, and I'm not making an excuse for them. I think they're going to have to take a long look at everything they do if this season ends up flaming out with a sweep in the wild card round and they're done. But we also have to remember that development is not linear. It's not always just a perfect incremental, hey, 5 games better than last year and 5 games better next year. I mean, it doesn't always work that way. Sophomore slump is a term that's been talked about for years in Major League Baseball. I talked about it with Corbin Carroll, who was NL Rookie of the Year last year. His numbers now look good, but he had an awful first half. I mean, he was just horrendous, and he was a guy that was kind of the toast of baseball in October. What he did for the Diamondbacks a year ago. So it took him a long time to kind of get going this year, but it's a difficult game, and it's a really difficult game for young guys and for young guys who have high expectations. That's why I said to you when we were talking about Connor Norby last week, I said he's been a really good success story. That trade doesn't look good right now whatsoever. And yeah, hindsight, knowing what happened to Westberg, it would have been great to have him. But I also am not going to sit here and say what he's done for the Marlins offensively, he would have duplicated with the Orioles when the stakes are so much higher than the Marlins playing out the string as a lousy team. So, it is a difficult game. It is a game rooted in so much failure. And for anyone, but especially young guys, sometimes you take some steps back. And unfortunately for the Orioles, even with putting aside the injury part, and that's such a huge part of this, they've had some guys that even in the midst of a season, I mean, Adley Rutschman was an all-star in the first half. And since July 1st, among qualified hitters, he's been, bottom 10, bottom 15 kind of guy. I mean, no one would have foreseen that, but it's baseball, and guys fail, and teams don't always live up to expectations. Unfortunately, this team exceeded expectations last year, and now this year, after the first 2.5 months, certainly have not met them as they're limping to the finish here. But to your greater point, they still have a chance here. It's not over, right? Baseball is a game where you can catch fire just like that. So try to get healthy, try to show some signs like you suggested. Doesn't even have to mean you have to reel off 8 wins in a row, but let's start getting this thing moving in the right direction again, because it just feels like it's getting worse. If anything, it's certainly not getting better.
All right, the energy moves back to Camden Yards this week. We have an 0-2 football team. We have a scuffling second-place baseball team. We're off to Dallas for football, on to New York early next week to take on the Yankees. We got a lot of sports things happening. We got a lot of oysters to eat. It is the Maryland Oyster Tour. We're in our 26th year of doing this, so I'm going to do 26 oysters in 26 days, 26 ways. All of it brought to you by our friends at Liberty Pure, 1-800-CLEAN-WATER. They keep my water clean. I didn't know anything about salts, and all I know is the water made the tub green, and it was a mess. And trying to learn about all of that, and one thing though, you call them at 800 Clean Water and they just come and take care of it. So trust the professionals, Liberty Pure Solutions. They're right here in North Baltimore County. They're also really good plumbers. Our friends at Jiffy Lube Multi-Care are powering Luke up, getting him back and forth to the ballpark. Also sponsoring our Maryland Crab Cake Tour. I will have Raven scratch-offs, as well as I got a handful of these Gold Rush double or sevens. We had a lucky batch last week. We were down at Cooper's and doing the show down there at the Fells Point Oyster Festival, where Patrick Russell at Cooper's and his crew down there, 26,000 oysters shucked over the weekend down on the square in Fells Point. We're in Oyster Town. Oyster Recovery Partnership event is on the 26th at the B&O Railroad Museum. We're going to be educating folks about oysters, where they come from, how they grow, how they go, how they oxygenate the bay and clean the bay up. They are the filters for the bay in the same way that my friends at Liberty Pure Solutions provide the filter for the water that we drink. And then that's how we get the crab cakes tasting so delicious, so I can get back to Costas next Friday and get some crab cakes down there as well. Crab cake tours at Fadley's this Friday. It is at Costas next Friday into the playoffs. We are doing a crab cake tour special birthday edition for Luke and I in October. All of us good Libras getting together and eating pizza at Pizza John's in Essex. That's going to be on Friday, October the 11th. Fingers crossed. Luke, right now, I don't ask you to bet on anything, and I don't even ask you for your Ravens picks until Friday because I know I'm not going to get them. The Orioles going to be alive on October 11th when we have our Pizza John's crab cake. They have a nice crab cake at Pizza John's, but I know you're not getting the crab cake. You're going to get the pizza. But are they going to be alive on July or October 11th?
If you want me to be honest, no.
Okay.
But
that's all I want. That's all I wanted you to say.
Way stranger things have happened.
That's it. It just gives me a chance to shove it at you on the 11th when they're in the ALCS and we're having a good time. So I hope that's the case.
I hope so.
I know one thing. You'll be a year older by then, but I won't be because I don't turn until October 14th. So that's a big weekend for great people, man. We got Sammy Hagar, myself, Jim Palmer. It is a weekend to, I don't know, go on the internet and bitch about things the way Palmer does, drink a lot of tequila the way Sammy Hagar does, and talk a lot of sports the way we do. And we'll be doing around here the next couple of weeks. Lots of great guests. Dave Sheinin from the Washington Post came down to Cooper's. He did not bring me a Snoop Olympic pin from Paris. I was a little upset about that. Chad Wiesling brought great energy and great information as well. We did the crab cake tour on Friday at Cooper's as part of the Fells Point Oyster Festival. You'll be hearing that this week as well. And Mark Viviano was great last week over at Coco's when we got the Oyster Tour started. So it's a big month, great conversations, plenty to talk about. Let's not bitch too much. You know, we're in season. We waited 8 months for football to start. Let's not beat ourselves before we get to Dallas. Hey, Vegas made the Ravens a 1-point favorite to start the week. So Vegas still believes, even though they beat the Ravens last week. He's Luke. I'm Nestor. We are WNST AM 1570, Towson, Baltimore. Vegas used to mean something else. Baltimore positive. Stay with us.